When I exposed my stepmom's fraudulent secrets, she grabbed a knife and attacked me. I was seriously injured and shouted for help, but she laughed and left me alone. I returned with a plan for revenge and gave her a shocking surprise she never expected the very next day. My name is Charlotte Carter, and if someone had told me a year ago that my life would turn into a chaotic storm of betrayal, deceit, and heartbreak, I wouldn't have believed them. I had always thought of myself as a grounded person. I was 28 years old, working as a marketing executive in sunny San Diego, pouring my heart and soul into a career I loved. I had a small circle of friends who felt like family, and most importantly, I had my dad, Richard, who had been my rock since my mom passed away 5 years ago. My mom's death shattered us both. She had been the glue holding our family together, and without her, the house felt empty. My dad, who had built a successful career as an entrepreneur, threw himself into work to cope. I don't blame him for wanting to move on, but I wasn't ready for what came next. About 2 years ago, Vanessa entered our lives. She was everything my dad seemed to need: glamorous, confident, and full of energy. She was 45 but looked like she had stepped out of a magazine with her perfectly styled hair and designer clothes. She had a way of making people feel like they were the center of her world, and at first, I thought she might actually be good for my dad. He smiled more when she was around, and for a while, it seemed like maybe we could be happy again. But it didn't take long for cracks to appear in Vanessa's polished facade. She was always overly interested in our family's finances, asking questions about the farmhouse my parents had bought years ago, a place my mom had cherished. At first, I dismissed it as curiosity, but something about the way she lingered on topics of money made me uneasy. Still, I convinced myself I was being paranoid. She was my dad's wife now, and I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt. The turning point for me came one evening at a family dinner. Vanessa and I were alone in the kitchen, and she casually mentioned how fortunate I was to have such a successful father. Then she said something that sent a chill down my spine. "You know, Charlotte, you shouldn't take your inheritance for granted. Things can change in an instant." The way she smiled after saying that made me feel like she wasn't just talking about life's unpredictability. I didn't share my concerns with my dad at first. He was so smitten with Vanessa that I didn't want to burst his bubble. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't who she appeared to be. Then came the night of the gala, a night that changed everything. Vanessa had organized a grand charity event at a luxurious hotel downtown. It was the kind of affair that made you feel out of place unless you were dripping in jewels and sipping champagne. My dad and I arrived together, and Vanessa greeted us with her usual dazzling smile. She looked radiant in a deep red gown, but something about her eyes unnerved me. They weren't warm or inviting. They were calculating. As the evening went on, I noticed Vanessa hovering around my dad more than usual. She handed him a drink, her hand lingering just a second too long on his arm. I watched as he took a sip, oblivious to the way she glanced over her shoulder as if checking to see if anyone was watching. My stomach churned, but I couldn't put my finger on why. About an hour later, my dad started acting strange. He seemed unsteady on his feet and had trouble focusing during conversations. When I asked if he was okay, he waved me off, blaming it on the long day. But I knew my dad. This wasn't like him. Vanessa, ever the attentive wife, suggested they step away from the party to take care of some paperwork. My dad, clearly disoriented, nodded and followed her out of the room. I wanted to intervene, but before I could, they disappeared into a private suite. I spent the rest of the evening trying to push aside my anxiety, but something didn't feel right. Vanessa returned alone after about half an hour, looking calm and composed as if nothing had happened. My dad, on the other hand, didn't come back to the party at all. When I found him later, he was sitting in the car, his head resting against the window. He barely remembered leaving the gala, let alone signing anything. The next morning, Vanessa acted as if everything was normal, but when she casually mentioned plans to modernize the farmhouse, my blood ran cold. The farmhouse was my mother's dream home, and the idea of changing anything about it felt like a betrayal. That's when I knew I couldn't ignore my gut any longer. Vanessa wasn't just a loving wife, she was playing a game, and my dad and I were her pawns. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of Vanessa's web of deceit. As I sat across from her at breakfast, watching her sip her coffee with that same smug smile, I made a silent promise to myself. Whatever game she was playing, I would find out the truth. And when I did, I would make sure she paid for it. After that morning, I couldn't ignore my instincts any longer. Vanessa had crossed a line, and I was determined to figure out what she was hiding. It wasn't just about the farmhouse or her suspicious behavior, it was about my dad. He deserved better than someone who saw him as a means to an end, and I couldn't let her manipulate him any longer. I decided to confide in Julia, my best friend since college and a brilliant lawyer. Julia was 30, sharp as a tack, and had always been my voice of reason. Over coffee one afternoon, I spilled everything. Vanessa's comments, her odd behavior at the gala, and my dad's memory loss. Julia didn't hesitate. "Charlotte, you need to investigate this. Something's not right," she said firmly. "If she's tampering with legal documents or manipulating your dad, she could ruin everything your family built." That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with all the possibilities, each one worse than the last. What if she had already stolen from us? What if she planned to take everything and leave my dad with nothing? The next morning, I made up my mind. I needed professional help. That's when I hired Detective Marcus, a 40-year-old private investigator with a reputation for exposing fraud. When I met him in his modest downtown office, he listened carefully as I explained the situation. His calm demeanor and methodical questions put me at ease, even as the weight of what I was doing sank in. "Charlotte," Marcus said after a moment, "if what you're saying is true, Vanessa could have serious legal consequences. But I'll need to dig deeper to confirm anything. Are you ready for what I might find?" I nodded. I have to be for my dad. Over the next few weeks, Marcus worked quietly gathering information. In the meantime, I did my best to keep up appearances around Vanessa. It wasn't easy. Every time she smiled at me across the dinner table or made a flippant comment about family, I wanted to confront her, but I knew I couldn't tip her off. She was clever, too clever, and I needed hard evidence before I made my move. One evening, Marcus called with an update. "Charlotte, you are right to trust your instincts," he said. "I found records showing Vanessa transferred ownership of the farmhouse and another property to her name. The documents were signed the night of the gala." My heart sank. How was that possible? My dad would never agree to that. "Because he didn't," Marcus replied. "She used a sedative to impair his judgment and manipulated him into signing. It's all documented, timed photos from the gala and notarized papers from that night. It's airtight." I gripped the phone tightly, anger boiling inside me. "And the other properties?" "She's already started the process to sell them," he said. "But that's not all. I found evidence linking her to similar schemes in the past. She's done this before, Charlotte. You're not her first victim." The weight of his words hit me like a ton of bricks. Vanessa wasn't just a manipulative stepmother, she was a seasoned con artist, and now she was targeting the people I loved most. When I hung up the phone, my first instinct was to march into the living room and confront Vanessa. But Julia, ever the strategist, urged caution. If you confront her now, she could destroy evidence or spin a story to your dad. You need to be smart about this, Charlotte. So I waited. I spent the next few days pretending everything was fine, even as Vanessa continued her subtle attempts to alienate me from my dad. She made snide comments about how I was too focused on work to understand family values and constantly praised my dad for being such a generous provider. I could see through her charade, but my dad, he was blind to it. One evening, I caught her in the act. My dad was sitting in his study reviewing some paperwork when Vanessa walked in with a glass of wine. She leaned over him, pointing to a document, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Richard, darling, you missed this part. It's important." I lingered in the hallway, watching as my dad, clearly tired, scribbled his signature without a second thought. Venice's smile widened as she took the papers, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. It was all I could do to keep from storming in, but I knew I had to wait for the right moment. The next morning, I met with Marcus and Julia to finalize our plan. Marcus had uncovered enough evidence to not only expose Vanessa's fraud, but also to take her down legally. Julia helped me organize the documents and video footage Marcus had collected, ensuring everything was ready for the confrontation. We decided the best place to confront Vanessa was at a family dinner. It was the perfect opportunity to present the evidence in front of my dad, leaving Vanessa no room to escape. As I prepared for the evening, my nerves were on edge, but I reminded myself why I was doing this. For my dad, for my mom's legacy, and for the truth. Little did I know, the confrontation would not only expose Vanessa's betrayal, but also set off a chain of events more explosive than I ever imagined. As I looked at myself in the mirror before heading to the dinner table, I took a deep breath and whispered, "This ends tonight." I was ready for battle, but I wasn't prepared for just how far Vanessa would go to protect her secrets. Dinner that evening felt different. The air was heavy with tension, though I doubt anyone but me and Vanessa could feel it. My dad, as usual, was cheerful and unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. Vanessa played her part perfectly, gliding around the dining room, laughing and making light conversation. She looked every bit the loving wife and gracious hostess, but I knew better now. Tonight her facade would crumble. I had rehearsed this moment in my head 100 times. Julia and Marcus had prepared me well, and the evidence was rock solid. Still, my hands trembled slightly as I set the file of documents on the table beside me. I glanced at my dad, who was sipping his wine with a relaxed smile, then at Vanessa, who was busy serving dessert. It was now or never. "Dad," I began, my voice steady despite the lump in my throat, "there's something I need to talk to you about. It's important." Vanessa froze mid-step, her smile faltering for the briefest moment, but she quickly recovered, placing a slice of pie in front of my dad. "Oh, Charlotte, can't it wait? Let's just enjoy dinner," she said with a forced laugh. I ignored her. "No, it can't. It's about the farmhouse and the property you signed over to Vanessa." My dad blinked, confused. "What about it? I don't remember signing anything like that." "Exactly," I said, locking eyes with Vanessa. "You don't remember because you weren't in the right state of mind." Vanessa made sure of that. Vanessa's smile vanished, replaced by a hard, cold glare. "Charlotte, I don't know what you're implying, but you're out of line," she said sharply. I pulled out the documents Marcus had uncovered and placed them in front of my dad. "These are the transfer papers for the farmhouse and the other property. They were signed the night of the gala. You were drugged, Dad. Vanessa spiked your drink so she could trick you into signing these." The room fell silent. My dad stared at the papers, his face pale. I don't remember this," he murmured, his voice trembling. Vanessa scoffed, crossing her arms. "This is ridiculous. Are you seriously accusing me of something so vile, Charlotte? Richard, don't listen to her. She's just upset because she doesn't like me. I didn't flinch. You can deny it all you want, Vanessa, but I have proof. I pulled out a flash drive and set it on the table. This contains video footage from the gala. It shows you giving Dad the drink and taking him into a private room with those documents. My dad's eyes widened as I continued. Detective Marcus also found financial records showing you've been siphoning money into secret accounts. And then there's your past fraudulent schemes in other relationships. You've done this before, Vanessa. Vanessa's calm demeanor cracked. Her face twisted with anger as she slammed her hands on the table. You little brat, she hissed. You think you can come into my house and accuse me like this? You have no idea who you're dealing with. I stood my ground, my voice firm. Oh, I know exactly who I'm dealing with. A con artist who tried to destroy my family. My dad, still reeling, finally found his voice. Vanessa, is this true? Did you really do this? He asked, his voice a mix of disbelief and pain. Vanessa glared at me before turning to him, her expression softening in a desperate attempt to salvage her control. Richard, darling, she's lying. You know how jealous she's always been of me. She can't stand seeing us happy. But my dad wasn't buying it. He pushed the papers away, his hands trembling. Don't lie to me, Vanessa. Not now. Suddenly, Vanessa's desperation turned to rage. She grabbed a knife from the table, pointing it at me. You've ruined everything, she screamed. Do you have any idea what I've sacrificed for this? My dad jumped to his feet, shielding me. Vanessa, put the knife down. He shouted, his voice shaking. But Vanessa was beyond reason. I won't let you take this away from me, she shrieked, lunging toward me. What happened next felt like a blur. My dad grabbed her arm, trying to wrestle the knife away. Chairs toppled, and the sound of shouts and crashing plates filled the room. Finally, Vanessa lost her balance, stumbling backward and falling hard against the floor. The knife clattered out of her hand as she lay there, breathing heavily. The room fell silent, except for the sound of her ragged breaths. I stepped forward cautiously, my heart pounding. It's over, Vanessa, I said quietly. You can't hurt us anymore. Vanessa didn't fight as my dad called the police. When they arrived, I handed over the evidence Marcus had gathered. As they escorted Vanessa away, she shot me a venomous look, her voice dripping with bitterness. This isn't over, Charlotte. I didn't respond, watching her leave. I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. She had nearly destroyed my family, but seeing her brought so low was a reminder of just how far greed and betrayal could take someone. Once my dad sat down heavily, his face pale, he murmured, I can't believe I didn't see it. I'm so sorry, Charlotte. I placed a hand on his shoulder. It's not your fault, Dad. She fooled all of us, but it's over now. We'll get through this together. That night, I sat alone in the living room, replaying the events in my mind. Vanessa was gone, but her actions had left scars that would take time to heal. Still, for the first time in months, I felt the sense of peace. The truth was out, and justice was finally within reach. Little did I know, the final chapter of the story was still to come. The days following Vanessa's arrest felt surreal. For so long, I had focused on exposing her lies that I hadn't prepared for what came next. My dad was shattered. His usual cheerful demeanor had been replaced by a quiet sadness. Watching him struggle to process the depth of Vanessa's betrayal was heartbreaking. I knew I couldn't undo the damage she had done, but I was determined to help him rebuild what we had lost, both financially and emotionally. Vanessa faced charges of fraud, forgery, and attempted assault, and the case against her was strong. Julia worked day and night, meticulously organizing every piece of evidence Marcus had gathered. Meanwhile, Marcus provided additional damning details about Vanessa's past. It turned out my dad wasn't her first victim. She had a history of marrying wealthy men, draining their accounts, and vanishing once she had taken everything. Knowing that made it even harder to accept how close she had come to destroying our family. As the trial date approached, my anxiety grew. I trusted the evidence we had, but Vanessa was a master manipulator. I feared she would spin a story convincing enough to sway the jury. But Julia's calm confidence kept me grounded. "We've got the truth on our side, Charlotte," she reminded me. "She can't lie her way out of this." The courtroom was tense on the day Vanessa faced justice. She sat at the defendant's table, a shadow of the polished socialite she had once pretended to be. Her hair was pulled back tightly, and her expression was cold, almost lifeless. She'd avoided looking at me or my dad, but when our eyes finally met, I saw the same bitterness and venom she had always hidden behind her charm. The prosecutor presented the case methodically, laying out Vanessa's actions step by step. He showed the forged documents, the bank transfers, and the footage from the gala. Vanessa's lawyer tried to spin the narrative, painting her as a misunderstood woman who only wanted to help manage the family's finances. But the overwhelming evidence made her lies impossible to believe. When my dad took the stand, his voice trembled as he described how Vanessa had exploited his trust. His pain was raw, and I could feel the jury's sympathy for him. When it was my turn to testify, I recounted everything, from my suspicions about Vanessa to the night of the gala and the confrontation. With each word, I felt a surge of determination. Vanessa had tried to ruin us, but she had failed. Just when I thought we were nearing the end, Vanessa made a desperate play. During cross-examination, she admitted to forging the documents, but claimed she had done it to protect my dad. "Richard was reckless with his finances," she said, her voice trembling. "I had no choice but to take control before he lost everything. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I was trying to save us." Her words were calculated, and for a moment, I saw the jury shift uncomfortably. Vanessa's ability to manipulate emotions was on full display, and it scared me. But Julia was ready. She calmly introduced a series of emails Vanessa had sent to an accomplice, detailing her plan to steal the farmhouse and sell it. The emails were undeniable proof of her greed and premeditation. The courtroom buzzed as the prosecutor delivered his closing argument, reminding the jury that Vanessa's actions were deliberate and driven by selfishness, not desperation. When the jury returned, I held my breath, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. The foreman stood and announced the verdict: "Guilty on all counts." A wave of relief swept over me as I felt my dad's hand tighten around mine. Vanessa remained expressionless as the judge sentenced her to 10 years in prison. For someone who thrived on control, losing her freedom was the ultimate punishment. As she was led away, she glanced at me one last time. "This isn't over, Charlotte," she said quietly, her voice laced with bitterness. But her words didn't rattle me. They only confirmed that standing up to her had been the right decision. With Vanessa out of our lives, my dad and I began to heal. The farmhouse and other stolen properties were returned to us, but the emotional wounds she left behind were harder to fix. My dad blamed himself for trusting her, but I reminded him that her deceit wasn't his fault. She had fooled us all. I spent more time at the farmhouse, restoring it to the way my mom had loved it. The process was cathartic, reminding me of the strength my family had always shared. My dad started joining me, and together we made the farmhouse a symbol of resilience and hope. Julia and Marcus stayed close, their unwavering support reminding me that even in the darkest times, there are people you can count on. Julia joked that I should pursue a career in law after all this, but I was content with marketing. For the first time in months, I felt at peace. As I sat on the farmhouse porch now, watching the sun dip below the hills, I felt a sense of closure. Venice's betrayal taught me hard lessons about trust, greed, and resilience, but it also reminded me of the strength I didn't know I had, the strength to fight for my family and protect my dad's legacy. Life isn't perfect, and I know challenges will come again, but for now, I'm at peace knowing that truth and justice prevailed. This farmhouse is ours again, and no one will ever take it from us, not while I'm here.